I'm going to share with you some insights into the Haggadah, the Pesach Seder. It's a very traditional night, and the actions are the same, repeated, but there's a lot of, so much written on the Haggadah and so many different insights. So I'm looking at this stuff. I was looking at this stuff this afternoon that we don't, kind of bit off the beaten track in terms of some interpretations and some explanations of the things we say and we do at the Seder beginning with the name of the evening. Why do we call it Seder? Seder means order. And there's some things that make not so much sense about the Seder, which we'll come back to in a little moment. But the Seder is there to precisely show us and point out to us that there is an order in everything that happens in the world. And that when you look back, as we do here historically, at something that happened, a couple of 3,000 years ago, or 3,000 years ago, and we reflect, everything starts to make sense, and we understand why the way God made the world um, is absolutely, the way God runs the world, sorry, is according to a divine plan, which is not always immediately evident to us, but with hindsight, does come into place. So that's the Seder, where we sit down and we actually say there is a logic, there is an order, there is a reason why things are happening the way they are happening. But at a deeper level, there's a lot of what we do on Pesach, which kind of doesn't make sense, even in our practices. The extent to which we destroy chametz from our possession, start looking even at a drop of chametz, the pains we take in the kitchen, because we appreciate that chametz is what we call asur b'mashahu. Even a minute amount of chametz would render the mixture improper for use, improper for consumption. So we go to, kashering the kitchen, covering surfaces, and going to extremes, taking out new crockery, cutlery, covering over, and kashering and so forth. These are extreme measures. How do we explain any of these? Not in any logical way, not in any evidently, obviously simple way. We need to, in Pesach, start to delve into the mystical. And when we start delving into the mystical, I'm not taking you there tonight, um, only for lack of time, not because I'm, in any way scared of doing this or scared of taking you there. And so Pesach is a little bit different in terms of that we don't do things according to the normal order, which is to look at things first at face value and then go deeper and deeper. We actually go backwards. So it's an opposite Seder. Look at the two words here. So we normally talk about the concept of paradise. That's a word that means orchard. But the letters of this word spell the various layers at which we deal with things in Torah normally. The pei stands for pshat, or the simpler literal interpretations of verses, actions, mitzvot, etc. Um, Beyond there, we go to something called remez, and remez means the illusion, the more indirect, and that takes you to drash, um, which is homiletics, and sod, which is the mystical part, mystical dimension of Torah, the hidden part of Torah, things that are sourced in Zohar, and Kabbalah and so forth, um, and and uh, and that's the normal way that we would approach a mitzvah, a practice, paradise. Pshat, Remesh, Drash, Sod. But look at Seder. Seder is actually the inverse. We begin with the Pesach Seder by looking at the mystical. That's the Samach. Normally it's the end. We then move on to the Drash, which is the homiletic interpretation. We move on to remez thereafter, which are the illusions that are contained in the things that we do. And you can see that the pay is totally absent to show us that what we're doing tonight is not the stuff that is obvious and evident at face value, but that we're digging in from the mystical and going outwards. So that is a reason why this evening is called a Seder. And what is our obligation? What is our mitzvah on this Seder night? It is to tell the story of the Exodus, and we go way back. We go to our humble origins. We start with Terach, who was the father of Abraham, who was an idolater, and we show how we pulled ourselves away from our early, humble, maybe somewhat embarrassing origins, all the way to being in Egypt, where again we were sunk into idolatry, where we were so seeped in the Egyptian way of life that included worshipping the deities that they did, and we pulled ourselves out, and we tell that whole story. Of course, giving due credit to those who were involved. Moshe gets a very little, small camera appearance, but of course, Hashem is obviously right through in Israel as the Redeemer, and as we say, God didn't send an angel or a messenger, but redeemed us, He Himself, Melech Malchem Lachim, Hakadosh Baruch Hu. So it's a mitzvah. It's a positive commandment, just like we have a mitzvah of lighting candles on a Friday night before Shabbos and Yom Tov night, a mitzvah to put on tefillin, and so forth. We normally recite a blessing before we perform a mitzvah. But in this case, we don't. We actually omit the bracha. And we go straight into telling the story. And at the very end of the section of Magid, at that point, we recite the bracha, and that's when we drink the second cup of wine. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher ga'alanu. He redeemed us. Ga'al avotenu Mitzrayim, and He also redeemed our ancestors from Egypt. Higiana alayla hazeh, He brought us to this night. Lecho ba matzah maror. We were eating matzah maror, and we say, Kain, Hashem Elokeinu. Likewise, may God bring us to other festivals in peace. So we make a bracha, and the giveaway is actually in the wording of the bracha. So I should have put up the English on. Asher ga'alanu v'galat avoten. He redeemed us and redeemed our ancestors. We have the obligation of viewing ourselves as being personally redeemed, of not looking at the Seder as something which happened a long time ago, which we remember because it's important to us, but as something which we are going through. And a Seder experience is complete. A Seder experience is whole. We actually live through the experience. What we say just before that bracha, that's Mitzrayim, and every generation we've got to consider that we've just left Mitzrayim. So it has to be a fully immersive experience where you actually go through the experience of feeling trapped in the idolatry of Egypt and in the lack of freedom of Egypt, which are kind of synonymous and one and the same. And then you come out of Egypt and you have that freedom, and you're marching towards Sinai, where you're going to receive the Torah, which is going to give you eternal, true and deep freedom when you're connected to Hashem via the mitzvot that He's going to give us. So that's a process that we have to actually kind of relive in a meaningful, deep way ourselves on Pesach, and not just look at it historically. Hence, the bracha that we recite at the end, Asher Ge'alanu redeemed us, Ge'alat Avotenu redeemed our forefathers. Not the other way around. He redeemed us and shall redeem us, redeemed us and redeemed them and will redeem us. But actually, we talk about personal redemption even before we move on to historical redemption. And this is what is alluded to in the fact that the bracha is only recited to at the end. And let me illustrate that by way of another bracha that is recited after the mitzvah is performed. And normally, as I said, you make the bracha, perform the mitzvah, because you're sanctifying the action that you're about to perform. In a sense, when we wash for bread, we first um, wash, put the water over our hands, and then we recite the bracha. Incorrect, improper to make the bracha with hands that are still soiled. You haven't cleaned yourself, and but the bracha is al netilat yadayim, and you make the bracha, and then you dry your hands only afterwards, and that's how you perform, how you complete the mitzvah. But that's a similar concept to a person that converts to Judaism. So the act of conversion happens in a mikveh, and the immersion in the mikveh is what finalizes and formalizes that process. When a Jew immerses in the mikveh, the bracha is recited prior to immersion, and women who use the mikveh will be familiar with this procedure. When a convert converts and uses the mikveh for the first time, they immerse first and then recite the bracha. Why? Because until they have emerged from the water, they are not Jewish. And therefore it would make no sense to recite the bracha, Asher Kiddushan Mitzvotav, saying, Hashem, you have sanctified us with our commandments, because that sanctification has not happened. That it's about to happen, but it hasn't yet happened. So the bracha for immersion in mikveh is recited just after the immersion, when the person has emerged from the water, takes a breath, and now, as a fully fledged Jew, says, God, you sanctify us, you command us, and I've just performed my first mitzvah by immersing and thus becoming Jewish. This is a similar concept that we are going through on the Seder night. At the beginning, we can't talk about God has redeemed us. Because we're not. We're going through the active redemption of Mitzrayim at the Seder on Pesach night. So we can't really make that bracha. We can only make that bracha when the process is duly completed, and we've been through, and we've said those famous words, B'chol dor vador. We have to consider in every generation that we come out of Egypt. And once we come to grips with that concept, that idea, that we've actually just experienced an exodus, a freedom, then we can make that bracha fully. The Seder is based on the famous 12 Seder steps, and generally they recited right before we begin the Seder, when people sing Kadesh, Urchatz, Karpas, Yachatz, or whatever other tune is traditional in your family or community. Kadesh is washing of hands, or sorry, oops, let's start again. Kadesh is the Kiddush, where we sanctify the wine and the festival. Urchatz, we then wash our hands. Karpas is when the vegetable is consumed in salt water. Yachatz, from the word chatzi, is of the breaking of the matzah in two. Magid is to talk, which is the story of Pesach, we were just talking about the Exodus. Rachza, washing hands. Motzi matzah is of the taking out, eating the matzah. Maror is the bitter herbs. Korech, which have to be wrapped. Shulchan Orech. Then we have the meal. Tzafun afikoman. Barech, we bless. Hallel, and we are then saying Hashem's praise, and Nirtza, all of it is accepted. I'd like to share, I think, a cute insight into the words. So not literal, but as we said earlier, Pesach is not necessarily literal. Kadesh or Chatz. If you wish to sanctify yourself and cleanse yourself, then Karpas. Now, Karpas is actually a very interesting acronym, and that's why it's got those little things to transform the word Karpas, which is a green vegetable, into Klal Rishon Pe Satum. And that translates as first rule, mouth shut. That's the beginning. Okay. First, close your mouth and listen and pay attention. You can't really get anywhere by just talking. People who speak excessively, normally it's to, get out of sticky situations or because they're extremely nervous, but it's not because they really want to progress. Then, when it starts time to have a magid to talk, yachatz, limit it, break it, be deliberate in what you say, and don't say that's all because you want to reach sanctity. And the next thing is motzi, take out, matzah. But the word matzah also means strife. So you want to sanctify yourself, close your mouth, be deliberate, think of what you want to say, and then avoid any kind of strife. Because strife is maror korech. It's also always wrapped up with much bitterness. Then you get to Shulchan Aruch. You'll then be blessed with abundance and sustenance from above. Tzafun. You've got to be careful that you keep it hidden. Don't flaunt the blessings. And then Barech, you'll be able to bless Hashem, thank Hashem, praise Hashem, and of course, that will be received. So that's just kind of a lengthy play on words and definitely not the literal meaning, because I've explained the literal meaning to you, but an interesting insight nonetheless, which takes us to a very central feature of the Seder, and those are the 4 cups of wine. Now, lots of reasons given for why we have 4 cups of wine, traditional, Talmudic reasons, and so forth. But here is a very interesting one. When Hashem initially decreed the Egyptian exile, it was going to last 4 centuries. And when they leave Egypt, Hashem says, it actually was 430 years ago that this decree was given to Abraham when he was told, your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs. So that is the kind of the maximal length that the decree should have lasted. In practice, it didn't. In practice, the real harshness of the decree only happened from just before Moshe was born. A few years before that, and we work it out to be 86 years. Moshe, of course, was 80 when he faced Pharaoh first time, but 81 when he left. It was 5 years when they left, sorry. It was about 5 years before that things got really tough with the initial Pharaoh passing on, the new Pharaoh coming in, feeling very threatened and upset about the harshness, sorry, the growth and the prosperity of the Jewish people within him, being threatened by them, and for that reason, the decrees begin. But those are the decrees in earnest. So they were strangers for a long time, but the actual servitude of Egypt only lasted for 86 years. Now, here's an interesting one. The name of God you're seeing on the screen, Elohim. If you add the letters of that, that's 86. 86. Aleph, Lamed, Hey, Yud, Mem. So that's 40, 10, 5, 30, and 1. So that's 86. That is the name of God that denotes judgment, harshness, the judge, Elohim. That's when Gvura is being meted out. When God is on the mode of being exacting with his creatures and being harsh. That's the name that's being used. How much should we have had? 430 years is actually 86, 586s. But what happened was somehow we managed to stave off 4 times 86. And 86 has got another interesting gematria. It's the word kos. A kos that you hold a cup. So that is chaf, vav, and samach. Chaf is 20, vav is 6, samach is 60. So it's 86. So we have 4 cups of wine because we managed to get rid of 4 times 86 divine um, harshness. Here is the maths here, 430 minus 86 is 344. So we get rid of that 4 times 86, or 344. Somehow we managed to avoid that harshness, and the 4 cups represent the rejoicing at the 4 times 86 years that we were able to lighten the Egyptian exile. Now, just interesting one here. Shin Mem Dalet, that's 344. That's one off the word Moshe. Okay, with the same letters, can you see the shin's here and the mem is here, but the dalet, which equals 4, now becomes 5. So when the Moses brings his own dimension in, that's when you have the expression, the fullness of Moshe. It was really he who was able to do this 344 trick to get the Jews out of Egypt when he did. So that's just one insight into the 4 cups. That's a little bit, can I say, off the beaten track. Now, here is an interesting Seder practice, and that is the breaking of the matzah. Why do we break the matzah? Many, many, many reasons given also. It's still early enough for the Seder that writers of Haggadot still had, as you get towards the end of the Seder, there's less and less commentary. Beginning pages of the Haggadah, there's always a lot of commentary. So what can we say about Yachatzim? Once again, suggesting a few, but we refer to this as the bread of the poor, lechem oni, the bread of poverty. The poor man doesn't normally have a full loaf. So by smashing the matzah into 2 pieces, we kind of signifying that this is incomplete bread of poverty. But on the night of Pesach, it says the following in the Torah. It is a guarded night that God took them out of Mitzrayim. Hu halayla hazeh, this night, shimurim lechobnei Yisrael dorotam. It's to be preserved by all Israel for all generations. What's the meaning of that? Not just we need to remember it in the past, but also this night of Pesach is also a celebration of the redemption in the future. It's also a redemption of the redemption. Sorry, a celebration of the redemption of Mashiach. And actually, the Seder is divided up into 2 parts. Up until a lunch, sorry, that's dinner, up until the meal is served, Shulchan Orech, we're dealing in the past. We're talking about stories from Egypt. Then we have dinner, and the last 2 cups deal with the future. And if you look at the verses of Hallel that are read subsequent to the meal, that's why Hallel is broken in two, because the first 2 passages of Hallel are historical, and the next few passages of Hallel deal with the future redemption. So we do both in a Seder night, and we break the matzah in two. The smaller half, which is the smaller redemption, that's Mitzrayim, which to us is huge because that was the birth of our people. But we're told in comparison to the future redemption, so Mitzrayim is going to, Yetziat Mitzrayim is going to pale into insignificance when we try to put it side by side with the wonders and the miracles that are going to be performed when we leave the current exile and move into the final redemption with the building of the temple and so forth. So we deal with both the small piece, the first half, and the bigger piece, the bigger redemption, second half. So not really halves, because of course one is bigger than the other. And what do we do with the second piece? The larger of the two. That's always a game the kids love to play. Like which half is bigger? No, There's no half, but half means it'll be the same. Oh, it's the one on the left, it's the one on the right, and that's the one that the head of the household then wraps in the serviette and puts away for later. Um, that's so significant of what this redemption is. It's about um, hiding it because it's hidden from us, so we hide the afikomen, but it's the larger part, and we're going to take it out at the end when we're about to start that celebration of the future redemption. We find that piece, we unwrap it, all kinds of games where the kids have hidden it and the head of the household has to find it, or whether the Seder leader has hidden the afikomen and the children have to find it, whichever practice you follow, depending on communities and norms and cultures, and some in where it's not done at all. But the idea is that afikomen is hidden, found, and consumed, symbolic of the larger redemption, in fact. Let's move on to the four sons and a lovely story I read, which I want to share with you. Before we talk about each of the sons, we have an introductory paragraph. Here's just a shot from a Haggadah, where if you can see, I don't know how clear it is, we say that God spoke about Arba'a Banim, Echad Chacham, Echad Rasha, Echad Tam, Ve'echad She'enu Yodeh Lisho. One who is wise, one who is wicked, one who is simple, one who doesn't even know how to ask. And I don't know, they've written Chacham here, but I'm not quite sure what this illustration is about. And the story I read that I'm sharing with you now is that Reb Elimelech of Dinov, so he used to get really inspired by before starting his own Seder, walking around the streets of, I guess, and listening to Jews all over practicing the Seder, performing the Seder. And it's usually done, and people can hear. If you walk past somebody's window, you can hear the singing, you can hear the talking. And so he walked past the home of a very simple villager, an educated man. And they were getting to the point of talking about the four sons. As I said, it's quite early on the Seder, and he heard the man who obviously didn't understand what he was saying recite the word Echad in the tune that we reserve when we talk about Hashem, as in Shema. Echad, distinctive tune. You know the person, even if you only hear that word Echad, they're talking about the one God and our belief in that unity of Hashem. And Rabbi Elimelech was extremely impressed by this. What we would laugh at and say, this guy is so uneducated, doesn't even understand what we are, what this is all about. And we were just talking about a wise one, and he says, this is absolutely unbelievable. Uh, this Jew, even from the Rasha, turns it into something holy. Every one of God's children is sanctified and holy and is one and united with the Almighty above. So that's a different perspective again, taking it very far away from the literal meaning, but definitely a bit of an insight. And let me leave you with the last idea from my Seder, and this refers to the practice we have when we recite the Makot, and that is to dip our fingers into the glass and pour a drop of wine out for each of the plagues. Why do we do this? You see, when we recite the plagues, they're I wouldn't say mixed emotions, but dual emotions. On the one hand, talking about the downfall of Egypt fills us with joy at our own personal redemption. But it cannot be avoided that we experience also joy at the suffering of the Egyptians. It's just a human emotion that when somebody has oppressed you, somebody's caused you trouble, and then they get the just desserts. You have this feeling of joy at their downfall. Of course, that's natural, understandable, excusable, but wrong. So on our Pesach night, when we are celebrating uh, the downfall of Egypt, which is our redemption. And we talk about the suffering the Egyptians went through, we kind of make sure our cup is somewhat diminished, that our joy is not complete, because the thought of the suffering of any of God's creatures is one that cannot fill us with joy, even if it's our detractor and our enemy. Thank you. I want to wish you a Chag Pesach Kasher Sameach next Wednesday. Please excuse me as well as the following week in Chol HaMoed. We'll resume either the Wednesday right after Pesach or the following. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Rabbi.